Hey, Super Crew, this is DC-san. Minasan konnichiwa, DC-san desu. Let's get to this episode of Legends of Tomorrow. Season 2, Episode 2 was an action-packed episode. I will be talking about things that happen in this episode, so spoiler. Letting you know that if you haven't seen it, please do not watch this video until afterwards. Let's get to it. So, the Justice Society of America, the way they portrayed this version on screen was really nice and interesting because the costumes were pretty much on point. They had that nice old school feel like the comic books does, and or did, depending on if you're looking at book or digital. But still, the way they were portrayed on screen was really nice. I liked how the team worked together and they basically showcase each character's ability or special technique, especially in their first confrontation with the legends. So I had a few people ask me what I thought if the character that was being portrayed on screen was Obsidian or Raven. Well, that question has been answered. It is Obsidian. And the way they portrayed Obsidian this time I thought was really, really cool because that's a character uh, that's powerful enough to where he can do quite a bit or nothing at all, depending on the writing and the way that they wrote the character this time, I thought was really cool. So, on that, thank you. As far as the legends not working together well, um, it's a bit of a coin toss for me because you would think by now they would work better together. Not so much because they're missing some members, whether they pass, lost in time, doesn't matter. Um, but you would think they would gel a little bit more, but that also takes away from the dynamic of the team of them not getting along. So they played it well in some of the episode, and in some instances like a little too much. But I would like to see them come together a little bit more, especially when they have to work as a team. As far as this episode goes, it was interesting how they would go somewhere and certain things that stand out in history didn't really stand out, especially when it's coming across from one person to another, or one culture to another, specifically in Nazi territory, and how there were two characters that were there that pretty much got away with just being there. And it was interesting to see how they didn't play into that too heavily. And I was actually pleased because sometimes that can be overdone. But as far as the traveling back and forth through time, the reverse flash being there, the amulet being there, what do you guys think the amulet is going to be used for? And why does the reverse flash want it so badly? Do you think it's to help increase Damien Dark's power? Do you think it's to be used to basically bring back a specific character? What are your thoughts? I'd like to hear that. I enjoyed the way that this episode was played out in history as far as where they decided to have their fight, how steel was potentially made, and what will happen from here on out. Explaining that he doesn't have enough to clot his blood, making him a hemophiliac, was an interesting way to basically say that he can't really feel or tell when he's bleeding or injured. And it's leading into, once he gets the serum or what they're going to do with his character, depending on how they'll explain it in the next episode, him having little to no feeling. So that's going to be kind of interesting and see how they play that. I thought it was kind of cool and kind of awkward how he's talking to his grandfather because, you know, some of us would love to meet our ancestors, no matter how far back it goes, because we'd like to know more about where we came from and, what makes us who we are. But at the same time, what's not really portrayed in television a lot is how it actually jars and makes the opposite side uncomfortable because, like they said in this episode, sometimes people have a hard time seeing their future, which is true. As a parent, it's hard to see your children growing up because, well, you miss when they were babies or you miss certain aspects of their life earlier on. Meeting your grandkid has got to be awkward because, outside of him coming from the future, a bunch of things going on, him knowing when you're going to pass, if not how you're going to pass, that has to be unsettling. So the way they had it in here, and they, said it in passing how uh, he didn't really want to see his grandson, so he was kind of avoiding him through the episode up until the end. I thought was nice because it didn't have to be something that we saw, but after hearing about it, it's like, yeah, it's easy to understand. It's uncomfortable. It's jarring. Things I would like to see in this next episode: more story of where they're going with this amulet. Mainly because, what are you going to do? There's so many things that you can do with the story and so many characters you can introduce, especially since you're playing around with the time stream. You can pretty much do anything. That's one thing that some people forget about. Since they're flying back and forth through time, you can do whatever you want to. The downside to it is, outside of changing history, is how does that affect Barry's timeline? That's a really good question. So for those who are watching The Flash, how does Barry's time stream and timeline, whichever of the three that he's changed or gone back and forth from, affect this particular show and its timeline, since they are going basically time jumping everywhere? Does it affect anything? Things that they do? Does it affect Barry's side? How does that all work? Because that's kind of a conflict, is it not? If you don't think it is, tell me why. If you do think it is, let me know why, because I'm kind of torn between the two. Wouldn't one negate the other, or wouldn't one affect the other one way or another, bouncing back and forth that way? So it's kind of awkward. I would like to see some of the characters more often. I'm hoping we get to see more of the Justice Society, specifically Vixen, because she had a very short web series that was on the animated series, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And then she was introduced in the show, last season, and then that was it. But that's a character I'd like to see them do more with, mainly because there aren't enough female characters within the group. In just with the Legends, there's one, and then with the Justice Society, there's two, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But add another dynamic to it, especially since there are some members that are no longer there. So, guys, let me know what you think. What did you think of this episode? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Where do you think they're going with the overall story? I'm interested to see what they're doing. I was thinking that Herr Kruger could have been the precursor to Solomon Grundy, but unfortunately he's not. Although it would be cool to see Solomon Grundy on TV, because I just like to see how they portray him and who would play that character, because I think he's an interesting villain to a point. But anyways, thank you for tuning in. Love you guys. Glad you took the time to check out the video. Please leave your comments down at the bottom. And until next time, Super Crew, keep it super.